This Australian Grand Prix episode is brought to you by Australia's House of Powersports, A1 Accessory Imports, proud importer and distributor of Motorex oils and lubricants. From high-performance engine oils and gearbox oils to brake fluids, greases and protective sprays, Motorex has the perfect product for any job. So, if you're serious about top-tier performance and protection, you can count on Motorex to deliver. Visit motorexoil.com.au and find exactly what you need to keep your machine running at its best. Hello everyone and welcome back to the OMG MotoGP podcast, your Aussie Grand Prix review edition. I'm your host, Renita Vermeulen, and of course alongside me is the man who needs no introduction, Mr. Keith Hewen. But Keith, we've got a special guest. We have got Sam Charlwood, a Australian motorsport journalist and Channel 10 Network 10 presenter. Sam, welcome to the pod.
Hello guys, thanks for having me. Very much the Australian edition this time around. I love it.
I'm in the middle, aren't I? I'm bound to be in trouble now.
Have to be nice. All our Aussie listeners are going to be like, Keith, you got to say nice things about us Aussies.
Well, that was a good thing, wasn't it? Because you were down under, obviously looking after our interests as well down at Phillip Island. And the reaction for the OMG pod's been pretty good, hasn't it, from Australia? America as well, I have to say. We do well in both networks.
Before we jump in, I do want to shout out each and every one of you who came up to me this weekend, introduced yourself, even asked me for a photo. Like, that never happens. And just hearing how much you guys all love and support the podcast, it means the world to me and on behalf of the whole team. So thank you so much. It was so nice meeting you all. But let's not talk about me, Sam. Let's talk about you. You were also on the ground this weekend at Phillip Island. And tell us, what was your take from the weekend? You're obviously working for the network, so you got to get up close and personal with many of the riders.
Yeah, I was working for the network, and I was actually working head in hand with your brother all weekend. So that was fantastic. I cannot speak highly enough of Chris, and it's something else different. Like, I've covered this event for 5 or 6 years at Phillip Island, but doing it with him, you definitely get an added layer of access. You can walk into any pit garage you like. If you're with him, you get a lot of great insight from the engineers, from everyone across the team. So this weekend, I think it was a race that a lot of people probably deserve to have, both fans and riders alike, because we've had a pretty horror run at Phillip Island in recent years. I was a little bit nervous heading into the weekend because the new asphalt at the circuit has sort of brought some categories unstuck early in the year. Like, we had the World Superbike race. They had to do a grid stop midway through the race. And even the Australian Superbike Championship a few weeks ago, they had to do the same. So I was a little bit nervous when I saw that and the weather forecast leading into the weekend. But it was fantastic. We had pretty decent crowds all weekend, great weather on the Sunday, and the racing action spoke for itself, didn't it?
You alluded to it there, Sam. The weather, that makes a massive difference at Phillip Island. You get 4 seasons in one day there. We always moan about the UK, but I have to say Phillip Island this time of the year is a problem as well. And it gives them no chance to set very, very difficult motorbikes up and on a new surface as well. So no real running time, much dry running time made a massive difference this weekend to some riders. And it's a difficult track, particularly because you don't spend much time on one side of the tyre. It's asymmetric tyres for MotoGP, makes it even more difficult. And we see it. When the wind changes, when it comes from the south, Tasmania, South Pole, it turns 20 degrees colder than if it's blowing off the land. And it can switch mid-race, mid-session, which makes a massive, massive difference. Very difficult racetrack to get set up, but what a bloody place when it is set up right. I mean, Moto3 always is spectacular. Moto2 perhaps not so, but MotoGP, for me, it's a shame that Phillip Island is not just because of the weather. It's a shame that Phillip Island is at the time of the year it's at, purely and simply because the race that we got in the end, the MotoGP race that we got, it was all in Marc Marquez's favour, really, because he's not going for the championship. So therefore, he could go absolutely balls out and didn't have to worry about making a mistake particularly. Whereas Jorge Martin, Pekka Bagnaia are in that position where they're also vying for the championship at this time of the year. If it wasn't really as straight a race as perhaps we might have imagined. I mean, I don't think Marquez would be any different if he was riding for a championship, to be honest. But the fact of the matter is, it would be nice to have seen those guys absolutely head-for-head dogfight, real scrap, which we're not going to get at this time of the year.
How crazy was Mark's race start? And obviously, I know we need to touch on the sprint and everything else that happened, but I feel like Marc Marquez on Sunday, when he had that mishap with that tear off going under his rear wheel, and that, what did Frankie Carchetti's crew chief said he celebrated with the burnout before the race had even started? What are the odds of that happening, right? Sam, what's your take on that?
Oh, it's incredible. I remember something similar happened to Jack Miller, 2020. I can't remember the round that it was at, but there was a mishap with a tear off there. I mean, these guys, they do this all the time, right? And I think Mark knows that it's not ideal to throw your tear off at the line kind of thing. Really bad luck, but gee, it made a hell of a race. So, I mean, Phillip Island, the quintessential racetrack, I think, where, you know, we get that the lead group, the peloton almost, that, you know, the guys that sort of work their way to the front and they sort of keep their cards really close. And in the last sort of handful of laps, we get that sprint to the finish. And I think the fact that that happened to him, to go way back to 13th and then charge his way forward, you knew he was coming. But to be honest with you, like you said, Keith, he didn't have as much to lose, right, with this championship. And if I look back in the rearview mirror now, I think the weekend was sort of his in some respects from the very first session. If you go back to, obviously they had the first practice session cancelled, but the second practice session, he was out there straight away. He was making times and really sort of taking advantage of the situation. And it really did pay dividends towards the end. Martin was quick, sure enough, you know, in the sprint especially, but on race day, Marquez was the man to beat.
He got that bloody great big splodge that landed on him coming round to the line at the end. I mean, it was a vision thing straight away. I mean, normally you wouldn't tear off right on the line. I mean, normally that's the thing when you leave you leave a top tear off on that you usually get rid of at the end of pit lane when you're about to come out for your warm up or whatever it might be, warm up lap. You chuck it away because any finger marks or anything where you've been fiddling around with it, you know, tear it off there. And you saw him try to fold the thing up and throw it away. But by magic, it blew straight under his rear wheel and stuck there. I mean, it's been a problem in the past where you pick it up in the air vent or something like that and it blocks off some of the cooling, which makes the motors run really hot. That's been a problem in the past. I always remember, I think it was John Kaczynski once when he was asked why he particularly was either outbraked or locked up the front end, I seem to remember somewhere. And he said there was a fish on the track. And so I imagine that I would imagine that the tear off must have felt a bit like a wet fish. But he'd been having trouble with launches. He'd been practicing his launches all weekend long. They hadn't quite got that bike hooked up, and I reckon he knew what it was. But the rest of us were wondering, what on earth? Why have they not got that bike, you know, set up so that it actually launches off the line? But in the end, it was a bit of plastic under the rear wheel. My concern was that he might, you know, to work a tyre as hard as he had to work it to get to where he did from 13th place. It puts just that little extra all the way through the motorbike, through the tyre, and he might not have had anything left by the end of it, but completely wrong. Made it work.
Well, it was interesting that the rear tyre did work as well as it did, right? Like I was quite concerned throughout the weekend thinking, is this thing really going to last the full 27 laps? And even, I mean, Piero Terramasso, he was from Michelin, he was sort of a little bit circumspect when I asked him about it on Friday, but the fact that we didn't have that first practice session and the guys weren't doing long runs on that softer tyre, that really played into that as well. But in the end, it ended up being the front tyre that wore, right? And that was sort of, for Pekka, that was his big undoing, and I think the reason why he finished so far off the pace on Sunday.
Yeah, he looked like he might be with them for some of the race, but towards middle distance, he just hadn't got the performance out of the bike. I mean, those two at the front. Jorge Martin, I think I got him marked up for a double this weekend, so that was obviously going to doom him on one of the races, that's for sure. I mean, I think Jorge Martin, he again proved the new Jorge Martin for me this year, the mature Jorge Martin, the guy that's going to win a championship. You know, in the past, he'd have fought back, he'd have snapped straight back at Mark, and they'd have been banging fairings in the past. But he's taken the 20 points in the main Grand Prix. Okay, you know, a few less than what he could have done if he'd pit Mark. But he's put himself in a very good position, 20 points now in front. That's going to be difficult to come back from if he keeps this consistency up through the rest of the Grand Prix this year.
I wanted to ask you guys, and Keith, I want to ask you this as well, but how do you think that's starting to play now on Pecco's mind? Because when I was reading some articles this morning on a website, they're saying that Pecco's starting to blame Alex Marquez for that crash at Aragon as to why he's so far back, blah, 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 blah. Do you think this is now starting to weigh a lot heavier on Pecco's shoulders?
I think it seesaws. I think what happens is you get into a position where you've got a lead in the championship and you're protecting a lead. Then you get to a point where suddenly, okay, I've got nothing to lose now. I can go flat out and go for it. I think that's the problem you've got all the time. This goes through your head. And I think Bagnaia now, I think caution is something that he doesn't have the privilege of anymore. I think he's just got to go for it because Jorge Martin is scoring consistently. He's not making the kind of mistakes as many as Pecco's made this year. And he's looking like the world champion at the moment. But it can all turn, and Thailand might be the place where it does.
Well, to me, Saturday evening was the most stressed that I saw Pekka all weekend. I waited in the bull ring to interview him for Network 10. I think we were the last one in there to grab him, and he was in a bit of a rush and said, "I'm sorry, we've got a lot of homework to do tonight." And then went on to tell me, Jorge was playing with all of us today. You could see he was on another level. I guess the upside for him though is that he does get his shot, again in Thailand only in a few days. We've obviously got this triple header going ahead. So at least he's not dwelling on what's happened for too long.
Let's talk about Jack Miller, because he had probably one of the most interesting weekends I think I've ever seen in MotoGP history. With the amount of wildlife, we should just start calling him Snow White, because he clearly is an animal talker, because he hit a rabbit. He had a seagull stuck in his front brake lever as well during the sprint. It is just not the weekend that Jack wanted at Phillip Island, right?
Dr. Doolittle.
Dr. Doolittle.
His dad was joking with me on Sunday morning that, they might have to put a bull bar on the front of that KTM, and they weren't far wrong, were they? It's crazy.
And he'd be the bloke to put a bull bar on the front as well.
He would, yeah. He'd fashion up something very nice, very trendy, I reckon.
Did you guys see the photo? I think it might have been his wife Ruby posted on socials of just the hole in the fairings. I can't remember which animal it was, but just the size of it. That's incredible. And just the force that would have put onto the bike, right? And affecting, obviously it happened in Q1. Yep, Q1. And then it happened in Saturday's sprint. So both really critical, crucial times. But how much does that then play on your mind as you're continuing on? Or is it just something that you think he could just forget about, Keith?
Jack being Jack, he'll have forgotten about that and just got straight on with it. I'm absolutely sure of that. I mean, the wildlife, he'll be a bit concerned for it, but not that concerned for it. I mean, it's a fact of life down there. I mean, seagulls and the like. I mean, I have to say rabbits are a little rarer, but seagulls are a problem. And the bloody things weigh a ton. You get one of them in the face at 100 plus mile an hour and you've hit one.
Just us.
There's that classic of Iannone. Yeah, exactly. Coming down into Miller's corner, as it happens now, instead of Honda. But, I mean, that Q1 session was a great session because the longer you stayed out there, the more likely you were to go through to Q2. I've got to say, it was a very interesting. Everything was still breaking regarding the possibilities of where you were going to be on the grid. And Raul Fernandez and Nea Bastianini, they were the last guys pretty much under the flag, and they were the two that went through into Q2. Jack, with a hole in his fairing and a rabbit hanging out of it, was not going to progress. And not like Moto3, MotoGP, you still need grid positions, even at Phillip Island. I mean, it's a situation where it's in Moto3, slipstream counts out of turn 12 onto that Gardner Straight. If you're 15th, you're going to be halfway through the field by the time you get to Duans, turn 1. Whereas in MotoGP, it's a little bit different. And MotoGP as well, you're approaching it 200 odd mile an hour plus. And the amount of aero and the amount of movement of air around you, and we've seen it before when Zarco got caught up with Marquez back in the day into Duans, and that was that massive crash. This year we had that almighty crash, down into the turn. You get sucked in. It's a very, very difficult corner to very, very fast. Calling it Duans was the right one. Definitely, that is the right name for the right corner.
I'd probably just add to that. I think, I think he was a victim of circumstance. Like hitting two animals in one day definitely isn't ideal. But had it gone the other way, if we'd had more dry running, I think we would have seen qualifying times comfortably in the 26s. We saw a 27.9 at World Superbike earlier in the year. So, if he didn't hit the animals, if they had more dry running, would he have sort of kept pace with those front Ducatis? I tend to think not, especially with the race pace. It was so hot.
Well, let's touch on that crash. Woulda,
Sorry.
coulda, shoulda, exactly. Let's touch on that crash you just mentioned there, Keith, as well, with Maverick Vinales and Marco Bezzecchi. And watching it on the TV screens, it was scary enough, so I can imagine what it was like. But is it purely just like the dirty air and getting sucked in with that?
Well, you got dirty air and getting sucked in. I mean, for me, his placement was a little bit too far to the inside as well. And also, you've got two different styles of how you approach a fast turn. I mean, Maverick Vinales is not probably the last of the late breakers. He might just roll a little earlier. Unfortunately, Bez hit everything except the pace car this weekend. I mean, he had a diabolical weekend when you think about it. He'd already got a long lap penalty for... Actually... he got that long lap penalty for that as well, didn't he, for Sunday? But it didn't. Sunday was also an awful day for him. I think Bezzecchi it's one of those weekends, and it didn't work for him at all. But a little bit unlucky. Was a long lap penalty justified? Causing another rider to crash, I suppose. Yeah, technically, that's where the rule book is so difficult to interpret. It was a racing incident to most intents and purposes. But you felt he should have got a penalty for obviously causing Maverick to fly off the track. And especially when you're doing, you must have been doing 170 or 80 mile an hour at that particular point, which I don't know whether anybody here has actually stepped off a motor, but bloody things never went that fast when I was riding them. I'm getting off
I think I heard, with the data, it was about 240 kilometers an hour. So I don't know how that converts to your money, but yeah, definitely fast enough. I got some interesting insight from the tower after this. So apparently the damning evidence was the number of camera angles that Dorna has, but also the data that they were able to collect from Bezzecchi. This wasn't sort of made official to me, but there was sort of rumors coming out that his braking marker at that point was some 30 meters past where he braked on the previous lap. Which is, yes, they've given a concession there, not giving him a double lap penalty. I actually think they've done the right thing. I know probably the thing that they didn't do properly was communicating all of that stuff, because we're sitting at home, right, or we're at the track and we're just told long lap penalty. Well, you're like, it's a racing incident. If they were able to communicate that, show us some of the data, the different camera angles. If you've never been up in the tower at any MotoGP round, it's fascinating, the number of cameras they have, the detail that they have on the circuit. So once I sort of heard that, particularly with the fact he had overshot his marker by so far, it kind of made sense to me.
We've obviously a little bit luckier because working for the FIM with Stuart Higgs, who's the race and series director for British Superbikes over here, and he moonlights with the FIM, and he actually took the time to come down to speak to TNT, which is the broadcaster here, and he said, not 30 kilometres, but 40 kilometres an hour, 40 yards, later on the brakes than he was previously. So he clarified that on British television, exactly what you're saying. You've obviously picked it up for 10. We picked it up through TNT because Stuart Higgs was good enough to come and speak with the broadcaster and give that transparency. And I think you absolutely, it's the drum I've been banging virtually all my broadcast life, is that we do not get enough detailed information of the reasons why they give these penalties or don't give these penalties. So, Sam, perhaps you can start rattling the sabre from the Australian perspective, and I'll keep doing it from here.
I'm happy to. Well, I think the silver lining is the appointment of Simon Crafar, because he told me over the weekend he is going to make it his mission. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He wants to, and I think he'll make really sound decisions, but he really wants to stress how important communicating his decisions are. And I think the racing and the fans will be way more across things as a result. And there'll be more sort of harmony between the whole, around the whole sport.
This Australian Grand Prix episode is brought to you by Australia's House of Powersports, A1 Accessory Imports, the proud importer and distributor of Motion Pro specialty tools. Whether you're a professional mechanic or an enthusiast, Motion Pro builds specialty tools designed to make maintenance and repair tasks easier and faster. And A1 Accessory Imports is your go-to source for Motion Pro tools in Australia. Visit a1accessory.com.au and take your wrenching to the next level with Motion Pro.
Don't know how he does it. He's moved from being a racer, which is a fairly non-political animal, into being probably in the most political hotbed that you're likely to be in as a steward. And the problem with that is his wishes, for sure, but he's going to be smudging a few toes that perhaps are going to push back a little bit on that kind of transparency. They're going to want to put it in words that's like a legal contract, because you've got things like arbitration for sport or something like that those words that he says may be used to get a court of law against you at some later stage. So it's a very difficult position that he would be in by being too upfront with that in a public scenario, because if somebody decides to push back on a decision, a championship could be at stake at the end of the day through a penalty that's been delivered. And if something that Simon has said or anybody else from officialdom has said is used in evidence to sway a decision one way or the other, that could make a difference to a championship by the end of a year. Hopefully we never go down the road of what we have done before, actually, thinking about it. I was thinking of Iannone, who might be back. We might have him back for the last couple of Grand Prix. That'll be fairly handy. The Crazy Joe, the seagull killer from Phillip Island, will be back. Can't wait.
I've been wanting to start a rumor that maybe Valet will jump on the other bike. Wouldn't that be great? But
that rumor is out there. Did you start that, Sam? Because I saw that.
I can take credit if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, somebody down your end of the world definitely started it. But I remember back in the day, you were waiting for this, weren't you, everybody? I remember when we have a fella, and you'll know him well, Steve Parish. Steve Parish was a pretty handy rider, both Grand Prix and national stuff here in the UK. Well, he ended up being my team boss when I rode for Yamaha here. And one day, me and my then teammate, a fella called Trevor Nation, pretty swift kid, we're having a bit of a struggle with the way these bikes are handled. And we've been complaining to our team boss, Steve Parish, bloody things, we need to do this, we need to do that. So the next thing, Stavros appears with his leathers on. There is a point to this, by the way. And he was so incredibly slow because he hadn't ridden for a year. So it always worries me when somebody's sort of going to be coming back to stand in. Everything has moved on a little bit, and obviously from a ambition talent, to use Casey Stoner kind of analogy, those two things are wider apart in the case of someone coming back, even as good as Valet. So I can't imagine that he would be daft enough to throw his leg over a MotoGP bike at this stage of the season when everybody's red hot.
Well, let's continue on that for a second, because Valentino, look, I'm not agreeing with that one, and I don't think that's going to happen. But do you think it could be one of the superbike riders now that they've they finished their year, that they will fill in for Digio?
Well, I mean, Sam was on site, so he'll be picking up the rumours along with you. But I mean, from as far away as I am from the paddock, the Iannone thing, he's still around. Do we want an old boy back? I mean, it would add a bit of spice, wouldn't it? But again, it's a situation to step on a MotoGP bike. Yeah, there are so many things. If you go back over the years, I remember in British Superbikes, Neil Mackenzie, we were the broadcaster at the time. I can't remember. I think it might have been Sky. Back here in the UK, and Neil Mackenzie came back for a weekend at Donington Park, and our crew was saying, "Oh, he could finish in the top 3," because he'd been working with us as a pundit. And I remember thinking, well, if he did, he'd be an absolute hero, because again, it's at the time of a year when everyone is already pin sharp. They're right on it, and to step back into that, and on motorbikes that you've not ridden and got to the point where you need to get them to. I just don't think there's any chance. And again, if he comes out, he'll be lucky if he finishes in in the top 20.
I remember when Bayliss jumped on for that race in, when was it, 2006, and it sets a precedent in your mind, but that's not real life, especially not with these current machines.
Valencia, when Bayliss stepped on that thing and kicked their ass, I mean, you can't get a fairy tale better than that, really, can you? I mean, Aussie, really good guy, everything you want, a proper modest man. I mean, I've got a lot of time for Bayliss, and basically he went and did the business for Ducati, didn't he? Am I right with all of that? It was Valencia, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah,
We'll take your word for it. But everybody in the comments, let us know who you want to see fill in for the ride for the remainder of the year. Go on, throw some names out there. Like, give us your best options. We want to see. But let's also move on to Pedro Costa, because he was declared unfit after Saturday's sprint with that shoulder injury. And that's what's making me think, do you think he's going to be prepped and ready to go this weekend?
No. I think the injury he's got, he'll try for sure. He'll be in Thailand, but I think that ligament damage is worse than a broken bloody bone half the time. I mean, it's going to be a real problem. I speak from experience when it comes to shoulders. So it's doubtful. He'll be there. They may even declare him fit, but he's going to be in great pain.
I agree. I think, Keith, like you said, shoulders are a funny thing. You have to play the long game with them, don't you? So apparently, like I heard, and you guys may have heard the same, he dislocated it during the high side, and then it pops back into place as he's made contact with the ground, which, it's nasty. But the big picture thing here with that team, if you believe what you read, that they're more or less framing that bike around him for next season, like almost like what Honda did with Marc. They can't afford for him to make the injury any worse in the remaining few rounds as well.
Well, we're in Marc Marquez territory here, aren't we? I mean, I've dislocated my shoulder a couple of times, and I know what it's like. And it's A, it's painful. B, it takes bloody ages for it to come back. And even now, just for you, Renita, many years on, it really is still. I had an operation on it just a few weeks ago. It's something that is really difficult. And if we talk about Marc Marquez, you remember he'd have his shoulder out and he'd be on the back of that bloody scooter coming back round the service road, and he'd be popping it back in again, because once that starts popping out, and then he had all that ligament damage that he had to tighten up. Marquez was remarkable, the amount of injury he had, and Acosta is now copping some of that, and we'll see how he recovers from it. But I think Sam's right. I mean, I think you need, especially, he's not in any championships. He needs to be there or thereabouts for the last couple of rounds, really, and for testing afterwards. They need him for brightening up the bikes for next year. He's, championship-wise, he's not in the championship. Rookie of the year, he's been brilliant all year, and he's finally caught an injury that hurts. Be interesting to see how he comes back from that, because I think that also is a particular mental skill that Marquez is the top man for that. Then you've got the Morbidellis and people like that take a long time to come back from injury, perhaps. And then there's a whole raft of people in the middle of that scale.
I did feel a bit bad for him at Phillip Island, because he obviously started the season so strong, and then he had a couple of knocks down, during at that sort of middle third of the season, and it took him a while to come back. And then obviously we saw him do so well in Motegi. So I think the expectations, he was a bit buoyed by that Japanese round, and I think everyone expected him to do quite well at Phillip Island. It's obviously such a big adjustment there on a MotoGP bike, but yeah, it wasn't his weekend.
But what I did love, and Sam, from an Aussie perspective, how cool was his helmet this weekend? Did you see it, Keith? The mullet design, the promo video. I think as an Aussie fan, getting him with his personality and the character, it was so cool to embrace that side of the Australian culture. Let's call it the Bogan culture, with his stubbies and his high vis and this Pedro, it was called a Costa mullet hashtag. I think that was very, very well done. I enjoyed that.
Well, that's a Valentino. You take a lesson out of Rossi's camp in that kind of thing. I mean, Valentino was always very, very good at reading the mood and making it work at different tracks. But I mean, Acosta's going to be there or thereabouts, barring injury. These things they weigh heavily on some riders, some magical riders. Freddie Spencer, that's a good example. If we go back in the day. I mean, a guy that was the first alien for me, the first time I ever saw people. I refer to aliens as people that do things on a motorbike that their peers and their competition can't quite work out how they do it. When you do something on a motorbike that's so special that your riders that you're racing with go, what the? How's he done that? And Freddie Spencer was the first of that type. he'd go out, bearing in mind no tyre warmers back in the day, he'd go turn one and he'd go, stone cold tyre, scrub it, it'd be tucked under, closed, right under, and he'd scrub a load of heat into it. And then before you get to turn two, he'd do the same thing again. And the bloody thing would be off. And within a lap, he'd be on lap record pace. There are some things that people do that are completely magical. Is Acosta in that mode? We're going to find out. I mean, we'll find out how he comes back from injury. Freddie Spencer, well, once he hurt himself, wasn't ever quite the same Spencer that we'd seen before. And I think that's my point, is that we're in that, if we go to World Superbike, Top Rack, he took an almighty clump the other week. I mean, a real big one. It could have finished him. I mean, what that barrier is doing stuck out where it is in modern day racing, I don't know. But he hit a barrier so hard, it rang his bell so resoundingly that you wonder whether he was going to be able to come back from that. And bloody hell, he did, didn't he? And I think that marks
a lot,
off,
right?
Yeah, well, it marks off Top Rack as one of those riders that can recover from really, bad injury.
Ooh. I want to talk about the Japanese manufacturers, so Yamaha and KTM, but in particular Yamaha. Sam, I don't know how much you were with the Fabio and Alex over the weekend, but the couple of times that I was around Fabio, he just didn't seem himself this weekend. I didn't see the positive energy vibes that we're used to, and obviously not the most amazing result. I think he got a top 10 on Sunday, I believe. So for Yamaha, it's getting better, but it just doesn't seem like they're taking the steps that Fabio, I guess, was hoping for at this point in the year.
Yeah, look, first of all, I think Fabio is phenomenal. I think what he does on that M1, considering how far behind it is on everything else, is incredible. So I take my hat off to him. He seems like a lovely guy too from the interactions I've had with him over the past few years. But yeah, Yamaha have really got some soul searching to do. They've got Max Bartolini obviously coming across from Ducati next year, which will be good. There's talk of that V4 engine coming together as well. But it's all well and good to have a new engine, but I feel like they're going to have to build this bike from the ground up. The other thing against them is that they've only got two bikes on the grid. Like Ducati, even on the weekend, we would have seen it. They would have got their data from the limited running that they had from 8 different machines. They were able to collate all of that and, make changes across all their field. So, yeah, Yamaha's in a tough position. I spoke to Maio Meregali on Sunday, and he was sort of the same. He just conceded that they're just not close enough. Alberto Puig as well, I spoke to him on the grid just before the main race on Sunday. And, he sort of said, make no mistake, the factory is hungrier than ever to get back to the top step, but it's going to be a long road to get back there. I think, even 2025, 2026, there's no sort of cure-all for these Japanese factory teams. It's going to be a bit of a long road.
Well, 2025, we now know that that's the bike for 2026. The engine development's got a cut off. We've got a freeze for 26. So you run what you brung in 26. So you better hope they've got some improvements coming in 25 for them. Obviously they've got 4 bikes next year, which is a good thing with Pramac coming in. That'll perhaps work for Yamaha. There's no doubt about it. But I've always said that the testing capabilities now are so minimal. We don't have any real, weeks and weeks of testing like we used to have back in the day. It's a situation where it's limited. And I've always said that the homologation of motorbikes shouldn't really be until maybe the 3rd, 4th, 5th Grand Prix of the year. That should be where you cut off. So you're actually using sometimes the first 4 or 5 Grand Prix as also testing opportunities as well. You can try different things in those first few Grand Prix. I hate the fact that when we get to the first Grand Prix, that's the cutoff. That's what you've got for the rest of the season when it comes to the motor and the like. I mean, there are obviously some concessions out there for Yamaha and Honda now for the coming year, but there's still just not the amount of time really that you need track time wise to make that work. Be interested to see what Honda are working on, whether they're going to come up with anything as well.
Yeah, and I guess what compounds it too is the Japanese working culture, and hopefully Romano Bessiano at Honda and Max Bartolini at Yamaha can sort of, bring a bit of change to that, because the Europeans just seem to adapt so much faster and the Japanese are sort of stuck in this glacial pace of working. And I get it from an engineering point of view. Everything when it ends up on the motorcycle is sound, it is proven, it's all of that. But MotoGP waits for no one, right?
MotoGP waits for no one. Keith, I was just thinking then about Yamaha, and then I was thinking about Honda and how we're seeing at Repsol Honda, especially how we're seeing what Joan Mir is out pushing really hard, kind of like what Mark was doing, but constantly crashing, right? But then we see Luca Marini taking like that step back, and I guess he's just trying to finish the races as best he can. I know that he's battling, we hear about that, but is one way better than the other, do you think, in that instance, in the fact that Luke is going to be gathering more data because he is actually finishing the races, or is it just different riding style, different mentality there?
I tell you what, it's a bloody rock and a hard place, isn't it, between those two? You're backing off to try and make sure you got the data and trying to make it work, or crashing your brains out like Joan Mir is. I don't think I fancy either of those, to be honest. One is soul destroying, because you're just not performing in the way that you really want to, but you're not crashing. And the other one, crashing his brains out, which is equally as soul destroying and painful. Any kind of off on a motorbike is going to hurt. Even a tank slapper on one of these things is going to, you can dislocate your shoulder. You mentioned it earlier, Sam. You can dislocate your shoulder or break a wrist from a tank slapper. So these boys are on the very, very edge physically. And for me, if we reel it back a bit for the rule changes and stuff we got coming for 2027, I don't think they've gone far enough. I mean, here at Phillip Island, we had a lot of guys that were reversing right out of the aero. I think was it Raul Fernandez that ran virtually no aero, because this place, you're back to a proper motorbike on a proper racetrack. The kind of assistance you need from aero and ride height adjustments and all the rest of it. I don't know how you would feel about this, Sam, or what picking up on things around the paddock, and of course Renita, what the general feeling is. But I remember going back to Phillip Island, going back a few years, when Bradley Smith, British rider, said that aero is dangerous. I'm making that phrase up. I can't remember if he put it quite as forcefully as that. But basically, the amount you have got to work out when you're around another motorbike that's displacing so much air in different directions, when you're in a pack, it's really, really hard to manage that. And I think Bradley was alluding to the fact it's impossible to manage it. You're a passenger on the bloody thing, trying to sort yourself out, especially when you get to the end of the straight into somewhere like Doohan's. Doohan's is the kind of corner, fast riders on slow corners is fairly common. Fast riders on bloody fast corners is a different matter. It's a different situation straight away. You get fast corners are the ones that really get your attention when everything's on the move, front's tucked, rear's hanging out, and you've got aero that's pulling you one way and the other. You can't see it really when you're watching it on TV, but believe me, aero, anytime, go back any decade you like, it makes a massive difference. I mean, when you get on a normal motorbike, if you're on a normal production motorcycle on a racetrack, you get within 20 yards of the back of somebody else, you can't keep your head still because the aero that's coming off of it is moving you all over the place on your own bike. Compound that 100-fold with what we've got nowadays. Before I get into one of my usual rambles, I still think they've not gone far enough when it comes to aero. I think, is there any benefit anywhere in the world for motorbikes and motorcycling for ride height adjustments and aero? I wonder. It's a question that has to be asked.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, sir. Carry on.
I was just going to say, as far as the racing, the race on the weekend was 51.7 seconds faster than Phillip Island last year. But does it detract from the racing if you don't have that stuff? I don't think so. If everyone's closer together again, we're not so fixated on wings and front tire pressures and all of that sort of stuff, the racing's still as good, if not better than that. Even talking to Brad Binder, they've got obviously the aero on top of the cow behind the seat on their bike. He was explaining to me that it can actually compound the chatter issues that they're having because there is so much mass on there. It's working against the tyre in opposite directions to make that force even worse on the KTM. But it's a necessary evil because everyone else is running the aero. This is the tricky situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think our rule book is a bit too thin. I mean, if we make comparisons with Formula One, where it's it's 3 volumes thick or whatever it is, and I mean, we never want to get to the point on motorbikes where we're running DRS or something, drag reduction system, so you can make a pass. Like the only way you get a pass in Formula One is because you can press a button and you're 15 kilometers and quicker in a straight line. Technology is obviously a great thing, and this is the problem, isn't it? Do you squash technology? Do you squash that future? If we could all look into the future and see where we are in 10 years' time, that would be an interesting engineering exercise. But obviously we can't, and that is the problem. But we're talking about motorbikes here. It's a different situation to Formula One. I can imagine those test beds, they're EVs and so on. They're testing stuff that may translate into a car scenario later on. But I think motorbikes, with budgets, with the people that buy motorbikes, with the marketplace that it's in, I think all this stuff has to be considered as a package, really. And I think that we've gone down a road that is probably just a step too far. And I think that the problem is with engineers, they're bloody clever, and they can see a hole in a rule book before you know, Gigi Delinea's down it like a rat up a drain pipe. He's suddenly found a new way of producing something that's within the rules but really shouldn't be in there. And that's where we're a bit at with MotoGP. I mean, personally, I'd have been up for dumping aero a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Keith. I think when we get to 2027 with the new rules, we're going to see closer racing. And we discussed this on the pod in multiple episodes, but you have these problems now where the rider will get hit and they lose a front wing and how much that changes their race and they fall back or whatever it is. It's like, get rid of it. The riders can still just ride with a standard MotoGP bike, but we're actually going to see the really exciting racing. And that's what makes MotoGP. We're not Formula One, right? With the pit stops and everything.
But the problem you have is that Superbike then will be almost as fast. A standard road, a modified road bike, which we've got in World Supers. I mean, they're not as fast as MotoGP, although sometimes you get the attitude of World Superbike is that they're almost there. But the disparity between a road going series, which Superbike is, compared to a prototype series, there's got to be a sensible disparity between the two. Otherwise, it negates one or the other. Certainly MotoGP will be detrimental if we're not considerably faster and more interesting than World Superbike. But right now with all the MotoGP riders that have gone back into World Superbike, I mean, I'm just drawn to it. I can't not watch World Superbikes at the moment. It's one of the series is on the up, and you've got a lot of great riders in there. With BMW now performing virtually only in the hands of Top Rack, and then it begs the question whether Top Rack's performance is is he reeling in, metaphorically, is he reeling in BMW into a MotoGP situation? Are they suddenly going to think to themselves, well, hang on a second, we might look at the 2027? I think it's a wonderful prospect. Would we get another manufacturer come into MotoGP with the new rules in 2027? I doubt it, to be frank, but it's lovely to talk about.
Was it BMW that said they wouldn't consider MotoGP until they'd won World Superbike, and now they've done that?
I seem to remember that. I hope they pay Top Rack plenty of money. I mean, Kenan Sofuoglu is a particularly hard-faced manager, and I think the reason why we don't see Top Rack in MotoGP already on a lesser team, not that there are lesser teams in MotoGP anymore, but you know where I'm going, is because of Kenan. Kenan kept him in World Superbike. It might be that he does a Jonathan Ray and stays there forever, and has a wonderful life. It's certainly less stressful in World Superbikes than it is in MotoGP. MotoGP the stress level is 100% higher than it is in World Superbikes. You only got to walk around the paddock. You mentioned Pekka earlier on, Sam, in the back of his garage. Well, we've seen him, step back, and his missus looks like she's sorry, but looks like she's going to have a baby. It really is a situation where the stress in the back of that Ducati garage sometimes is palpable, and that's unusual for us sitting this side of the television screen looking in. You normally, all that sort of gets dialed out in the broadcast quite often, but you're right, Pecco looks stressed. You don't see that very often in World Superbikes. They seem to be enjoying themselves a lot more. I know which paddock I'd rather be in.
Right, fellas, I feel like we've talked a lot about MotoGP, pretty much covered all the main topics there. So let's move on to the lower categories. Moto2, I have to give a shout out to our Aussie, Senna Aus, getting his first World Championship podium and at home, third place. To be honest, though, there was a bit there I was thinking that the front two were going to take each other out and Senna could almost get the W. But I'm so stoked for him to have that first home podium. That's just going to help propel him further. But exciting race in Moto2. The battle that was it Canet and was it Aldeguer or
Aldeguer,
Lopez?
yeah.
Aldeguer, yeah.
Aldeguer shoved Canet out at MG, if I remember rightly. And Canet tried to tough it out, but Aldeguer had got him covered. It was borderline, really. It was a tough old move. There's no doubt about it. But Senna Aegis, let's talk about the Aussie. To do that at a home Grand Prix. Again, I'm very lucky to have had that situation, and to be on the podium at your home Grand Prix is exceptionally special. It's something that as a kid, you work towards. We talked about it in the podcast previously. When you go under the tunnel at Phillip Island and there's Doohan, Gardner, Stoner in bronze or whatever they're in, concrete. It's a place of myth really for Aussies. Some of the races that you've seen at Phillip Island from the main men have been fantastic. And so for Senna Aegis to come up as a kid and on the podium at your home Grand Prix, and let's face it, he was top Aussie. He was the kid of the weekend. He was representing you guys, but the rest of the world was happy for him as well, which is always nice. That's how bikes are.
You could see the jubilation on his face afterwards. I think it was really cool. I bumped into him that morning. I was with your brother actually, Renita, and wasn't in his leathers yet, just cruising around, very casual. But he had a plan, and he said his plan the morning of the Grand Prix was to sort of, if he could get himself up to between P6, P8, and then just sort of see where he would finish in the wash towards the end. Obviously, he was helped out a little bit by crashes and things like that. But, yeah, the execution was exactly the plan. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. He's a very, very switched-on guy. And I think, for Aussie fans, he's got a really bright future ahead.
Alonso Lopez was the one that helped him out. He dumped it and just promoted him. But, hey, it doesn't matter how. It's, again, woulda, coulda, shoulda. It doesn't matter about who does what where. He finished on the podium.
You've got to put yourself in that position to begin with, right?
Yeah, exactly that. You've got to put other people under pressure all the time to see what they react like. Canet, second place again. Unfortunate for him.
He's always the bridesmaid, isn't he?
Bless him.
And what do we think about Iaguro? Is he, in terms of
he's going to be world champion, but he's going to be world champion with a load of fourths and fifths. I think he's sort of kind of cruising towards the world title. And then he's off to Trackhouse for MotoGP next year, which as the Moto2 world champion, which is it's a bit of a quiet. It'd be great to see him win some races towards the end of the season and sort of underline the achievement. But how many points has he got now ahead of? Let's have a quick squint here. He's 65 ahead from Aaron Canet. Aaron Canet lost another 5 this weekend. So, or potentially he could have had 5 more. But it's still 65 points that is the difference at the moment. You've got to say with 3 rounds left, and they've only got 1 race a weekend, not like MotoGP with a sprint. So there's 75 left. He's only got to score, I don't know, it might be 11 points if we talk about count back for race wins. I haven't calculated that.
Has he learnt his lesson from last year, do you think? Is that?
Well, I would think that kind of lesson is etched on a motorbike racer's brain. And I think that when you've had that situation, you almost try to put that out of your mind because it becomes destructive. I think that, and has he got the personality that can do that? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? I think he's well enough ahead to whatever his reticence might be in the later races to score the points. I mean, he could be world champion in Thailand. He's only got to score, 10 or 11 points. And like I say, I haven't checked the count back situation. So he should be world champion. We've had one in Moto3 already. Moto2 should be decided in Thailand, I think. And then MotoGP, probably because of Thailand, is going to be to the Sweat Olympics in Malaysia, and then the god-awful end of season round at Valencia in the freezing cold. It's like, one of those sports where you go in the sauna and then you run out and jump in the snow. That's a bit what it's like when we come off of Thailand and Malaysia and then go to Valencia, crash straight in the snow.
Keith, what about your favourite? Who gave you a shout out on our OMG socials?
Jakey boy.
Jakey, yes.
Jake Dixon. I love Jake Dixon, but I mean, now he's got to relax and enjoy the end of his season. I mean, he had a mare of a weekend, a track that he would have really, really enjoyed. And I think, I mean, you guys could adopt Jake Dixon because he's got a sense of humour that goes well down under as well. So I would imagine that Jake would be adopted very favourably. But I don't know. I mean, Jake, he's just got to enjoy the end of his season and he's got to make sure he doesn't hurt himself.
Yeah, I think that when I spoke to him earlier, he wanted to put Japan behind him. And he made that very clear. And he's really, really looking forward to it, but not the qualifying that he wanted and obviously not the race results. But I think the comeback that he's had from the start of this year onwards has been an incredible journey from him. And we can already see that he's really looking forward to next year, signing with the new team that he's going to. So I think you're right. I think he's just focusing now on the end of this year and then getting set for 2025. But let's move on to Moto 3. Where, sorry, Keith, you're cutting in and out for me right now. What did you say?
More Aussies.
More Aussies. Yeah, well, actually, Moto2, I'm going to jump back there because we had Harrison Voigt as a wild card. He's an Aussie kid who's competing in the European Championship. And for him to literally get a call up, fly back over from Europe to come and jump on a Moto2 bike, I thought he did pretty well for a P18. And then we jumped down into Moto3 where we had Kelso, who was leading the race for multiple laps. And we thought, he could get another podium here at his home Grand Prix. And then Jacob Ralston, who's consistently hustling hard on that Tech Tour bike. But ultimately, it's hard with David Alonso, who is just going to be the next GOAT, I truly believe. But how cool was his Valentino Rossi ode on the podium with was it the tape or whatever he did? That was hilarious. Sam, did you enjoy the Moto3 racing?
I always loved the Moto3 race at Phillip Island, and this one was fantastic. It was really good to see Joel mix it with those top guys. I feel as though he has been working towards having a successful race at Phillip Island. It's been in the back of his mind for the past few rounds. So, yeah, it was nice to see him mixing it with them. Ultimately, I think he got pushed wide a little bit at one corner there and then just sort of lost momentum. But, yeah, Jacob Ralston was fantastic too. I loved seeing his nan, I think it was, as his grid girl. That was really, really cool. I mean, to do that at your home Grand Prix would be super special. So, yeah, the Aussie boys probably didn't, the results might not show it, but I thought they both had a pretty decent outing. Joel, yeah, showed some speed as well. He's moving teams next year, isn't he? So, yeah, it was nice to see him sort of show that he can have the speed at the front.
But Stefano Nepa was man of the meeting for me. Double long lap penalty. Came all the way through to fourth place. New lap record. But it was Jack Miller's lap record since 2014, believe it or not, that Stefano Nepa pinched this weekend. So, Jack's not had a good weekend, really. All the wildlife and his lap record gone as well. But Stefano Nepa coming through the fourth place, I thought, after a double long lap. And I mean, you're absolutely bang on. The Moto3 race at Phillip Island for me is the race of the weekend. I mean, that you've got 15, 20 riders sometimes in the main group. And they can't get away because of the long straight, Gardner Straight, coming out on it out turn 12. Yeah, they're just about flat out of turn 12 anyway, all the way down that straight. So they're peaking. And the amount of slipstream opportunities, I mean, if you're leading out of turn 12, you'll be 4th, 5th, 6th by the time you get to Duans at the end of it. Great racing, but Stefano Nepa was the man for me, or the kid, I should say, for me.
It's hard to believe what those kids do around that track because you hear, some of the tracks, especially like Motegi last one, very stop-start, and then you come to Phillip Island where it's so fast, it's so flowing, and they're just little. They're just little kids, and they are just going flat out around there. It blows my mind watching them, right?
Well, it's reflex. Most of the time with them, it is absolutely instinctive. I mean, if I was going to say that if you asked them afterwards what they did, they probably wouldn't know. But the thing is, the marker for me with modern-day motorbike racers are they do know what they're doing. And they do analyse on the hoof at a speed that I can't even comprehend, particularly nowadays. It's one of those situations where these kids are so sharp They speak multiple languages. They work out, data and all the stuff that they have to be across, and the management behind them bring them on. I mean, and they are really only kids. I mean, I couldn't touch my ass with both hands until I was about 25. So it was, literally. It's amazing what they do, and it's amazing what they're capable of doing. And you can see why it's so hard to break in from some of the lower rankings and stuff into top races, into top teams. Someone asked me again about the top rank Razgatlioglu situation coming to MotoGP. He can only come to MotoGP if somebody's going to offer him a top ride in a top team with enough time to develop, because you can't just walk into MotoGP and be there unless you are something exceedingly special, like an Acosta, for instance. But Acosta's been in that Grand Prix paddock for some time. It's not just about racing motorbikes. It's about managing the pressure that's in a MotoGP paddock. And it's huge. It's completely different to World Superbikes. World Superbikes is relaxed. I'm sure both of you, know that from being in the World Superbike paddock in comparison. I've got to say, Phillip Island, for me, if we might just backtrack to Phillip Island itself, the whole thing there is very relaxed. I mean, I love Phillip Island the press office is always a nice place to be, very helpful. Nothing's too much trouble. The parking is a problem, particularly when the weather's not so good. And of course, they're very particular where you park. But I won't go there.
Keith has a bit of a thing for Vic Pol, just letting you know, Sam.
Oh, look, we should have a beer together, Keith, because we share a lot of the same views. It's very draconian down there. I'm a New South Welshman, so look, it's a fantastic weekend, and I agree with you. Just to get a permanent spot on any one of our three grids now is a big accomplishment, because it's so ingrained, isn't it? Like they start from such a young age, especially in those European series. So to break through and then to make a name for yourself is incredible. But yeah, the Phillip Island round, it's fantastic. I love the Superbikes as well. It is definitely at a better time of year. I love the fact that you can ride on the outfield and pretty much stop at any corner, park your bike and watch. The access is a lot more casual. As a motorcycle fan, it's probably in some respects a better occasion. It's a bit easier, a bit less stress, much like World Superbikes itself. But unfortunately, I don't think Australian Grand Prix Corp will ever change the timing of the MotoGP round, because they like to bookend the season with Formula One in February, March, and then MotoGP later in the year. I know a lot of people would like to see that change, but it's hard to argue with the money and the fans that they get to Formula One. They're not going to go moving that.
How cool is it?
90,000 people. Sorry, Renita.
No, you go, Keith.
90,000 people was a good crowd for there. I mean, it's 36,000 on the day. Bearing in mind, it is a fairly remote place to start with. And maybe this time of the year and the variable weather gives it its personality. It might not be what the teams want, but that variable of not really knowing, everybody on their toes, trying to work their way through a restricted amount of dry time, wet time, cold time, sunny time, whatever it might be. I mean, you really, really do have to be across it, and it's mentally draining, from a team perspective, to be that far away from home, and to the difference in time, obviously for us, it makes a massive difference. So maybe that is the personality of the Australian Grand Prix, and maybe we shouldn't bloody move it. Maybe it's okay where it is. Again, it's something from a comments point of view, certainly from a spectator's point of view. I mean, Jesus, they're hardy. There's no doubt in my mind. If you stand out on Siberia where the wind's blowing off from Tasmania, I mean, it's taking the back of your head off. But it is it's got that old-fashioned feel. When you drive you've got to drive past the circuit, really. It's on your left-hand side as you come in. You've got to drive past to come in. And you can see everybody jockeying for positions. And it's like old school. You don't get places like that anymore, where you said it a minute ago, where you can walk around the banking. You can find a place that you want to be. You probably, some of the diehards probably mark the blade of grass that they've stood on for the last 10 years. It's once you've found your place, it's got a lovely feel about it. I mean, it's one of them ones where, if you can afford to, obviously you're quite a long way away from your normal the homelands of Europe, if you like. But you guys always manage to get over here, but we don't always manage to get over to you, which we ought to really, because it is a great event to go to. Melbourne is a good city as well, apart from parking, speeding.
Don't get him started. It reminds me a lot of, especially cows. It reminds me a lot of a little, Italian seaside fishing village. It just has that real charm about it. It's
that
really,
sort of
really
Misano
cool.
feeling.
Yeah.
Sort of a bit retro now. Misano sort of never really dragged itself out of the 60s and 70s. And I get that feeling as well about Phillip Island. But it's one to do. If you're a MotoGP fan and you're going to go to Australia at some stage, then book it at that time. I mean, Sydney's got like sort of 10 English cities in one city, effectively. You can go from different versions of English city around Sydney. But there are certain things that you can do in Australia that you can't do anywhere else, that you can't see anywhere else. I mean, culturally, I mean, it's an interesting place from that point of view as well. I might be just bloody teaching all you guys to suck eggs. You already know it all. But at the end of the day, it is a great place to go to. And Phillip Island should be on your list if you're intending on doing it. And in actual fact, it's bloody cheap to get to Australia nowadays. It's not expensive if you book it far enough in advance and pick your airlines. You can do a stopover in Bangkok if you like, if that's the way you want to do, or Singapore or wherever. There's so many hops.
You know what we should do, Keith? We should organise an OMG next year for the Australian Grand Prix, an OMG team meetup, and you guys can all come and be in my time zone for once, and we can have everybody from the pod there, do a live recording. I feel like we should make this happen.
I'm ahead of you. Ticket booked. I've already got the hotel done. So I'm already done. I'm there for a couple of weeks in Thailand for the Grand Prix in the middle of it. So I will definitely be there.
All right, listeners, if you want to come and attend a live OMG at Phillip Island next year, Sam, you can come as well because you're part of OMG now.
All right,
let us know in the comments if you want to do that. But before we let you go, because guys, we've been waffling on for about an hour. How cool was it this weekend that we were celebrating Mick Doohan's 30th anniversary since he won the championship? But he did a hot lap on his bike, but also Giacomo Agostini was there and he did a lap on his bike as well. I saw him walking throughout the paddock and he would go up to kids and it was just interacting with everyone and he just looked in his element. It was so cool to see him back out on track, right?
Ago looks younger than Mick.
I was about to say, whatever Ago, whatever his diet is or whatever his lifestyle is, I need to get into it because he looks amazing, and he jumped on that old bike and rode it really well too. And Mick was on the RCV 213V, the one you could buy a few years ago. They're about a $250,000 street legal bike, but it sounded incredible. And yeah, I got to chat to Mick just on the grid before the race started on Sunday. He was standing with Mark Webber, and yeah, you could just see him sort of taking it all in. How could you not, right? It was very, very special.
All right, Sam,
Mick,
dropping names. I was with Mark. I was with Mick.
Yeah.
Who else were you with? Eric Banner?
Yeah. No, I didn't talk to Eric. Can I make one small suggestion if you do come out next year, Keith? If you camp, bring lots of layers. I remember we rode down from Sydney to Phillip Island about 15 years ago. It was me and two mates, and on the way down we bought a $100 tent from Kmart, which is just a big chain store down here. And I remember waking at 3:00 in the morning and the top of the tent was touching our faces because the wind was blowing so savagely. So bring lots of layers.
I thought you were going to tell me that you kept the beer in the tent and slept outside.
No.
I remember
it would have kept it cold.
Just as a story, because we're quite used to it being cold and wet here, obviously in the UK. And I remember waking up at Cadwell Park once in one of my rare of occasions when I raced there and I lived in a tent. And I remember waking up and I was shivering. I thought, bloody hell, I can't believe it. And that's because I'd slid down the hill and the only thing that was still in the tent was my head. Everything else was outside.
I feel like that's the best note to end on, fellas. Thank you so much for chatting with me all about Phillip Island. Sam, thanks for coming on the pod. Where can everybody find you? Are you on the socials that people can follow you?
Yeah, I'm just at Sam Charwood on Instagram. I'm pretty bad at it, but at Instagram putting stuff on. But yeah, look, thanks for having me, guys. It was fantastic, and love chatting MotoGP. So always
good to meet you, Sam, and we'll hold you to Thailand next year.
All right, let's do it. Deal.
I'm in. Let me come in that as well. OMG team meetup, Thailand. But Keith, you're going to be back literally real soon with Amy to preview the Thailand Grand Prix. So listeners, you won't have too much time to miss us because yes, Keith's going to be back. But if you also can't get enough of myself, Keith, and the team, you can follow us on all the social media platforms at OMG MotoGP. Or if you have a question, you can email us at omgmotogp@gmail.com. But like I said, Keith and Amy are going to be back real soon to talk more OMG MotoGP.
This Australian Grand Prix episode is brought to you by Australia's House of Powersports, A1 Accessory Imports, the proud importer and distributor of EK Chains. Now, when it comes to the state-of-the-art Japanese-made motorcycle chains, EK Chains deliver. The ZVX3 sealed with the advanced NX ring is the strongest chain on the market, with 15% longer life than its predecessors. Perfect for your 1000cc street or track bikes, or any application where strength and durability matter most. Visit ekchains.com.au to find the right EK chain for your motorcycle.